You're listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
I wanna see the light.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting us share part of your day. Excuse me. My name is Jerry Mitchell, your host for Give God 90. Sitting in the supervisor's seat is Myron.
Hi, everyone.
We want to thank you for joining us.
Yes, we do.
We have. It's been a fun day here for a while. Nothing bad. It's just been fun. For all of the new folks, we want to welcome you, especially for finding us, for one thing, and for the ones who've been with us for a while. Thank you for hitting those like buttons, the share buttons, the notification buttons, rating us, because when we get the ratings, it helps boost us up in the whatever things that they do to make it easier for people to find us. Because it's not anything we've been doing; it's what you've been doing out there to spread this out and make it easier for people to find us. If you go to the website, I do have. If you remember, we spent a couple of podcasts looking at Psalm 50. My translation of that is on the More page on the website at givegod90.com. Don't forget, got to advertise the books because not everybody knows about them. We ran across a couple people today that had no idea, and now they know.
Right.
So,
They do.
So that's all out there. I would really like to say a couple of things tonight about the economy, but I'm not going to. I'm going to save that because I've got a lot to cover. But it's kind of interesting that the folks we were talking to today were having the same exact conversation as what you and I were talking about earlier this morning.
Yes.
They were talking about the area we live in currently and how it's moved from a production type economy to a consumption type economy. And the only way to keep a consumption economy growing is to add more people to it. And they don't like the idea of adding more people to it because that means more congestion, more traffic, more competition when you go to the store, for the items that are there to buy. But at the same time, it's kind of strange because the very people that moved here to have that and encourage that discourage production. So it's kind of like they're fighting each other. And there's a lot that goes with that, and there's a very sound biblical principle with that. But that's for another time. What I want to look at tonight, the most evil person ever. Now that might sound kind of odd thing to talk about, right? But it needs to be talked about because we need to understand this, and if you're not careful, you're going to learn something tonight. Now, if we ask almost anybody over the age of about 30 who the most dangerous person in history is, chances are they're going to say something. Maybe they'd say Bin Laden now because that, they were about 10 years old when that 9/11 happened, right? So maybe they'd say that Bin Laden was the most dangerous person. Maybe they'd say Hitler because Hitler's probably a well-known, infamous person in history. He is, Hitler's responsible for the murder of about 6 million Jews, but he's also responsible for the murder of thousands more. Are you ready for this? He murdered thousands of blacks, mentally disturbed, physically disabled, anybody that didn't look or sound or act like the master race. He was willing to exterminate. Nazi doctors performed terrible experiments on many, many people. And they even claimed that black human beings have a different muscular skeletal structure and system than the perfect race did. That was in their notes. That's what they claimed to find. Now, it's kind of interesting that all that was going on in near the middle of, the first quarter of, not even first quarter, close to the first half of the 20th century. 1930s, 1940s. They were still arguing over this stuff in the 50s. If you can imagine that. But what if I suggest this? As terrible as Hitler was, he's not the most evil person in history. Now, some might go back and they'd say, well, Constantine, he was a terrible person. The things he began lead to anti-Semitism in the world today. The protocols that he and his followers began led to things like the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition. That would make him kind of an evil person, wouldn't it? Even though he is credited with spreading Christianity. The way he did it and the things that came from that, he's not a very nice person. Before that, Julius Caesar. He's responsible for huge numbers of deaths in the war that he waged to add to the Roman Empire. And it's amazing, but as many people as he killed in battle, or as many people as his armies killed in battle, the estimate is that more than twice that number were tortured to death under Roman rule. But that's not the most evil person in history either. What does it take to be the most evil person in history? Well, even though this is kind of my opinion, a lot of people, I think, are going to agree with what I say this evening. When we look at the numbers, when we look at what's actually happened throughout history. Myra's going to read Genesis chapter 10, 8 through 10, and 11, 1 through 9. She's going to read it all at one time because this goes together and it gives us a chance to see what's happening.
Cush was the father of Nimrod, who began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. So it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. His kingdom began in Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Chaldea in the land of Shinar. Now the whole world had one language and a common form of speech. And as people journeyed eastward, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." So they used bricks instead of stone, and tar instead of mortar. "Come," they said, "let us build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches into the heavens, that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of all the earth." Then the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the sons of men were building. And the Lord said, "If they have begun to do this as one people speaking the same language, then nothing they devise will be beyond them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them from there over the face of the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it's called Babel, for the Lord confused the language of the whole world. And from that place the Lord scattered them over the face of all the earth.
Okay. So, are you getting an idea for who I'm going to talk about as being the most evil person in all of human history? I'm going to throw a lot of information at you in a very short amount of time, so be warned. Nimrod is described as being a mighty one on earth. Now, the word here, the Hebrew word Gibor, means mighty or strong, and we can think of this word the way they would have defined it even further would have been you were a leader, you were able to gather people together. In other words, they're describing someone who is a great leader, right? That's why sometimes they refer to Jehovah as mighty, right? Because he's able to gather people together. But there's much more, because that's not the end of the description of Nimrod. It says he was a mighty hunter before Jehovah. Actually, he was someone in the face of Jehovah. Now, what does that exactly mean? Well, if you think about it, it's the same exact word here as you will have no other gods before me in Exodus chapter 20. Okay, you're not going to have any more gods in my face. You won't have any more gods before me. If he was a mighty hunter before the Lord, he was a mighty hunter in the face of or in opposition to. Does that begin to hopefully give you some understanding of who this person was? He was in direct opposition. In other words, everything that our Creator called good, Nimrod did just the opposite. He was in direct opposition. Strong's number 6718 does translate hunter. So how did they think of the word hunter? Now, a hunter in this context is someone who pursues, someone who chases. They kill wild game. Sometimes they kill other people, right? Because you can hunt people just the same way as you hunt animals, right? I mean, I'm not saying anything drastically different here that hasn't been thought of this way for centuries. The concept of preventing escape also is in the context of a hunter. If you're pursuing someone or something, the object is to either trap it or kill it. That is what we're looking at. We're looking at someone who stood in opposition, but with the intent of chasing people down and preventing their escape. Now, that sounds kind of weird for that situation, doesn't it? But let's go a little further. If I'm going to lead a group of people and I was going to convince them to go a certain direction that maybe all of them didn't want to go, I would take them somewhere, and now this is the definition of a cult, right? You take them somewhere where they're isolated and you manipulate their lives in such a way that you can direct them to do the things you want them to do. Pretty simple, right? That's what a cult is. That's why cult leaders typically go somewhere where it's not very populated sometimes. Remember, Jim Jones was down in Guyana, and it's not terribly populated down there. They mostly the Americans down there who didn't speak Spanish. So they were kind of self-isolated. That's what we're looking at in this situation, although these were the only people on earth. More on that in a second. Now, we don't get much other information about Nimrod in the Bible. Why? If he's so drastically bad, so evil, why didn't Moses, just tell us all about him? Well, the answer to that's pretty simple. Who is Moses writing to? Moses is writing to the people that came out of Egypt. He's writing to the people that already knew the details. 20 years ago, people knew the details of 9/11. About 80 years ago, people knew the details of World War II. If you were going to write to someone 20 years ago about something, maybe you're going to tell them how bad bin Laden was. You didn't need to go through and say all of the things that he did, because they would have known. 80 years ago, if you were writing to somebody about Adolf Hitler, you wouldn't have to tell them all the evil things he was doing. They already knew. So the people that Moses was writing to, they had those memories ingrained in them since they were young. They knew who Nimrod was. They knew the trouble he caused. They knew all of these things. Moses didn't have to give us the details because the people he was writing to already knew it. And as time progressed from that, bits and details kind of get left out. Right? So unless you're willing to take the time to dig through the history and find out all these things, you're not probably going to be that familiar with it. Nimrod was a mighty man, a great leader, but he stood in the face of or in opposition to the Creator. And as he does this, he begins to separate these people from who? The Creator. On the plains of Shinar, where he thinks he can control these folks. And he does a very, very good job of it. Nimrod, as he was attempting to separate the people from the Creator, something kind of interesting happens. Now, he didn't do this overnight. It takes a few years to accomplish what he's accomplishing. And as he's doing this, the population is beginning to grow. According to the experts from the creation sciences places, they all agree within a reasonable number that the population, the total population of Earth at the time of the Tower of Babel was somewhere between 10 and 30,000 people. That doesn't sound like much, does it? But remember, this is only a few short years after the flood. So you start out with 8 people who get off the ark. Only 6 of them are having children now because of what Ham did to Noah. So Shem, Ham, and Japheth are the only sons of children, direct descendants of Noah, other than his, they have grandchildren now. So, you kind of start out with 3 families. So you go from 3 families to 10 to 30,000 people in a short amount of time. That's a lot of begetting, right? As we say in English. So, we look at these things and we think we got to keep these numbers in mind just a little bit so we know what we're talking about. If we look at verse 4, it says they wanted to make a name for themselves so they wouldn't be scattered over all of the earth. Now, that's kind of an interesting way to put that, isn't it? Because it's really something. And I'm looking at my notes and I'm looking, wow, I'm going to go back and look at that. But yeah, it's really, really something, because Genesis 9:1 and Genesis 9:7 instruct Noah's family to replenish the earth, the whole earth. Hi, Carol. I see you just jumped in for us. Thank you very much. As Noah and his offspring were supposed to replenish the whole earth, Nimrod instead gathers them all together in one place so that he can control them. with everyone in one place, not spreading across the earth, how are they going to make a name for themselves? Who are they going to impress? Who else in the entire universe was available to impress? Nobody, right? Unless you look towards heaven and the divine beings, the Creator himself. Now, to make a name for oneself is sort of a figure of speech. Nimrod had actually convinced the people that not only could they build a tower all the way to heaven, they could conquer heaven. Now, that's kind of laughable, I know, right? It sounds kind of crazy. Or does it? Because as the Creator watched this happen, nobody was standing up against Nimrod. Pay attention to what Moses records our Creator saying in verse 6. If they were able to do this by working together, there's nothing they cannot accomplish. There's nothing that they couldn't complete. They were all speaking the same language. They were all defining words exactly the same way. You know that two people can speak English, and if they're not defining words the same way, they can't communicate. That sounds a little weird, right? But think of it this way. Two separate nations got together to build something in space. And when they all got into space, they realized, well, the Americans had used one form of measurement. The other nation had used a different form of measurement. And when they got there, nothing fit. They were speaking the same languages, but they weren't defining things the same. Kind of, marriage is kind of like that, right? Just because you're speaking the same language, if you're not defining things the same way, you get confusion, right?
You do.
How many times have you said, "What do you want for supper?" And my answer is food.
Every day.
Speaking English, yeah, but do I need to be more specific? Yeah, I do. And I don't always do that. It's our joke. But you understand where we're going with that, right? If you're speaking the same language, but you're not defining the words the same way, there's confusion. But that wasn't the case here. Everyone understood exactly what the other person was saying. The original language, and many people believe it to be what we consider Hebrew today, that original language was so self-defining of a language that when you spoke, you knew exactly what it meant. The concept that carried through, you knew what it was. And when everybody speaks that language, there's nothing you can't accomplish. Because not only are you speaking with your mouth, you're releasing spirit with your mouth, but you are also expected to be in the same spirit. Remember, like it says, the disciples were all in one accord, right? So they understood each other not only physically, mentally, emotionally, but also spiritually as well. That is what can be accomplished. You can accomplish anything if you're like that. You want to know why some marriages last forever and others don't? It's because the two people whose marriage lasts, they speak the same language all the way around. When our spirits are whole and complete, we communicate with that type of understanding, we can accomplish anything. But Nimrod was leading all of humanity into rebellion. And using the knowledge that we had at that time, they were able to do things, and the Almighty looked down and said, we can't have this. There's no way we can have this. Without complete understanding, nothing can be accomplished. Without complete understanding between two people, if I'm speaking English and I don't speak Spanish and someone else speaks Spanish and they don't speak English, it's extremely difficult for us to carry out even the simplest transactions, right? Especially if one or the other of us is trying to, maybe they walk into a store and they want something behind the counter. How are you going to tell? No, not that one. The one over that way, and you're pointing, and they're looking, and you can eventually do it, but it takes a long time. So you're not going to be able to accomplish anything worthwhile. Think about two nations trying to communicate. We have the United States and Russia today, right? They're sitting at the negotiating table, but they're not communicating the right way. Because the United States has their agenda, Russia has their agenda, and poor Ukraine's sitting in the middle, feeling, I'm going to say this because this is an American expression, feeling like the redheaded stepchild, right? The one that, nobody seems to want. But both of them are fighting over it anyway. But you know what? This is what is really amazing. Our Creator, when He confused the languages, His blueprint is so... It goes on, it develops on every level, okay? Not only does it develop on the level of human communication, but it develops on the level of creation communication. Okay? Think about this. If you have two cells in your body and one is performing exactly as it's supposed to perform, and the other one is not, if it begins to go a way that it's no longer acting like it should, if it's, you could say it's mutating, but it's actually transitioning. You know what we call that? Today we call that cancer. When the Almighty confused the languages, He not only confused the languages between people, He confused the languages between all of creation, including the cells in your body. It almost isolates them. Think about that. Think about how amazing that is. When Adam, the animals were brought to Adam, He named them. They all got along. They all communicated with each other. How many animals communicate with each other today? Not very many. Now, if you're ever fortunate enough to watch a good border collie or a good sheepdog working sheep, they kind of, they look at that sheep and you can see the look in that dog's eye and the look in that sheep's eye, and you know exactly who's in control. And even though that sheep might try to rebel, guess where they're going to go? Right where the dog wants them every time. It might take them a little battle to get there, but they get there. That is how in-depth and in-detailed things were happening, and we don't even realize, because how many people have ever gone into such depth and in detail when it talks about the Tower of Babel? Oh yeah, he came down, he confused the languages, and people, they went their own way. That's typically all you hear. But this is such an important part. And the reason it's so short, again, is because the people knew the story. The destruction of mankind at this point was well underway. Just because the language was confused It doesn't mean that when the people actually did leave the plain of Shinar, that they didn't take with them the knowledge of what Nimrod had done. One of the most misunderstood lessons in Scripture is, I shouldn't say it that way. One of the most misunderstood lessons of religion that we have today comes from the plains of Shinar. And I need you to listen carefully to this, because prior to the plains of Shinar, mankind wasn't really concerned with going to heaven. It was Nimrod who wanted to conquer heaven, and he used the people in an attempt to build a tower to get there. The thought that we can somehow get into heaven, especially on our own, comes from Nimrod and his evil twisting of the understanding that we had concerning creation. We can no more get into heaven on our own. Well, let's say it this way. You can no more get into heaven on your own than if you stick your head in a bucket of water and try to breathe. It's impossible. You can't do it. If you try to do it on your own, you're not going to do it. Now, you can stick your head in a bucket of water, and if you have some extra equipment, you can breathe, right? But that equipment doesn't come from you. It comes from outside. It's called a regulator and an air tank. Scuba equipment. The thought and the process, even though Nimrod, I don't know if he actually thought he could actually get to heaven or not, but it didn't stop him from engineering the process. And the people, when they dispersed, carried that concept of that process. Now, it's a big, long, fancy word, okay? But Zoroastrianism is the religious word. Now, modern Zoroastrianism is a little different, okay? There is still the religion called that, but it actually goes back and can be traced to the plains of Shinar. It's kind of strange that all of Scripture, all the Bible, there's nothing in there that talks about going to heaven when we die. That concept comes from the plains of Shinar. It comes from Nimrod. It comes from him twisting what he knew the Creator had said. Plain and simple fact is that the early Hebrew people were not concerned with going to heaven, because their concern was to do exactly what we needed to do right now. They knew they couldn't go back and fix their past. That was for sure, especially at this point in time in history. They knew, their grandparents had told them about the flood. They had firsthand knowledge from somebody who lived through it and said, you can't go back and live your past. And they looked to the future and said, well, how are we going to get there? And they realized that the only way to get there was to live in the present, doing the things that they needed to do. When Moses was getting into the details of writing the things he was writing down, he gives us a lot of history up until Exodus. And from Exodus forward, now he gives us details about present time. He talks about the future a little bit, but he gives us present time real advice. And there's no present time real advice that says, oh yeah, eventually you'll get to heaven. It just isn't there. Because the present time real advice is we need to do what we need to do right now to please the Almighty. See, all of the prophets indicate that the earth was made for mankind. Even Isaiah specifically tells us there will be a new heaven and a new earth. Why a new heaven and a new earth? Because the complete destruction of the current heaven and earth is what is needed to purge all of the evil from them. Then, and only then, after all of the evil is destroyed, will the new heaven and the new earth be created. But this time, in an instant, there won't be any need to wait for 6 days. And only the truly faithful, those who have put their complete trust in the Creator, will be accepted into the New Jerusalem. You see, what Nimrod began on the plains of Shinar will be finished before the new heaven and the new earth is inhabited. Even the rebellious divine beings will be destroyed prior to the new heaven being inhabited by the faithful divine beings. Do you realize that when Hitler killed so many people in the 20th century, he was responsible for more than 7 million deaths at a time when the population of the earth was around 6 billion people? Now I don't want to diminish this, but that's really a small percentage. It's about 0.08% of the world's population at the time. How many people will be lost forever to that lake of fire because Nimrod did the things he did? That number is so huge, I don't think we can even begin to imagine it. But you don't have to be afraid of that number. You don't have to be counted in that number. You can actually learn how to live in the present. Learn how to live right now the way your Creator designed you to live. And that will ensure your future. That will guarantee your future. We have the promise and we have the guarantee. How many times in Scripture does it say, if you hear my voice and you do the things I tell you to do, then I will be your God. And even Yeshua, Jesus himself said, God is not God of the dead, he's God of the living. Your future will be guaranteed. You know, when he told that to Moses, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had been dead for about 400 years, right, give or take. And Moses kind of, looked around and went, well, I can do the math here. That's old, right? But how is he God of the living if they've been dead for 400 years? Well, they must not be dead. That's why we have a completely different understanding of life and death and sleeping, resting in the earth, shown to us in Scripture. If we look at it carefully, we see all that, and it all comes because we don't communicate completely. We don't communicate thoroughly. What happened on the plains of Shinar, I really do think proves to us that Nimrod, and we can look at, I didn't even get into all of the other stuff that happened there. Okay, there's a ton of traditions that we could have gone into that I didn't need to, because I can prove Nimrod was the most evil person in history without even looking at the things that happened after he died. But what you need to be concerned about, what you need to think about, is what you're going to do right now. What do you need to do right now today to be glorifying the one who created you, to be the one who represents him to the folks around you? Remember Psalm 50. Those who praise and worship me will glorify me. And you will be in his salvation. And all you have to do is learn to live the way you were designed to live. And you can do that if you go to givegod90.com. We will teach you how. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that tonight?
Thank you for joining us, and we will see you on Monday.
Yes, we will. Hopefully this was a blessing and you learned something tonight. Until Monday, many, many blessings. We will see you then.